my groove today. Been watching gray skies move away. I just don't think that I can lose, and I might just take a cruise and let the sunshine play. Something more, something new, something you get.
Welcome, everybody. A little technical difficulty there to get started, but we're alive and well. I hope this Monday episode, again, of The Approach finds you well, finds you in good health, finds you in a place where you're happy, healthy, you want to be. Drew, unfortunately, is not going to be with us tonight. He's under the weather. So we're kind of kicking it old school, almost back to the night school days, a year ago, over a year. So just me, be shorter, but I'm actually excited to talk about a few topics. Yeah, there's just a lot, and then kind of maybe just where is everything headed as it relates to the industry? And obviously, I don't know, but just some observations, whether they're right or wrong. I mean, I don't know, but hopefully some good dialogue. Hopefully, you're joining us. Again, congrats to Justin Thomas, a big fan of JT. Had him, I think it was like 30% of my lineups. Had him in an outright. Didn't get the greatest number. I think he was 18-1. I know they're better out there, but it's fun to see him get the job done again. A second major, the second PGA. So congrats to JT. And I feel like he deserved it. I know Mito kind of maybe helped him out a little bit, but JT had the worst of the two waves. He had to play in the toughest conditions, especially early in the week. And he just showed that JT can hit every sort of shot. It was just impressive what he did on 18 in regulation. Unfortunately, he couldn't make the putt, but then just the shots he hit in the 17 and playoff, pretty damn impressive. And so now we move to Colonial, and the week after a major is always super interesting. There's things to consider, but it's actually a decent field, and we don't typically see that after the week of a major. I know Harbor Town had a really good field this year, and now we get something similar, frankly. And I would say a decent comp course. It's not like going back and forth, but it's a decent comp course. But we're going to get into that, I'm going to get into that. But I just want to talk about one thing that I just noticed last week heading into the PGA, and I know there's more eyeballs on content, the weeks leading up, the live from the Golf Channel and kind of things like that. But I kind of tweeted it out, and again, I don't know if it's right or wrong. It's just observations, but feeling that there's more of a lean to figure out how the tournament will unfold versus thinking how are we supposed to beat these people in the contest, and if we're in the million makers, sometimes six figures, that we have six figures of lineups that we have to try to beat. And so what I mean, like how we figure out the tournament will unfold is, we say, around the green is so important. And it was. You look at the guys, definitely in the playoff, Willie Z had a good week around the green. JT had a great week around the green. But one thing I wanted to think of it as a math problem, that the answer is 5. But all week we hear that 3 + 2 = 5, and that's the way to get to 5. That's the best way to get to 5. In reality, there's multiple ways to get to 5. There's 4 + 1. There's multiple, and there's 2 + 2 + 1. Think of it as like that. So my point being is that I saw so many people just cross off great golfers because of the around the green kind of narrative. And that, again, turned to be true, but not every golfer that played well around the green. And the point being is that there's multiple ways to get to a solution. And so if we're hearing that each week, and Tampo brought up a great point, that we are in a little bit of a bubble on Twitter. We're not, Twitter isn't a great way to get a gauge on what the community is doing, or not even the community, there are opponents in the contest. But what it does seem to do, unfortunately, is develop that I have to lean and kind of fix myself into a belief of the type of golfers I'm trying to roster, and that really takes us away from really thinking, conceptualizing, how do I beat these other people, these other lineups in the contest. And so, point being is that around the green was important, but if you're not a good around the green player, it doesn't mean you couldn't perform well. And if you so I'm trying to think of other things that were tossed out. But regardless, there's multiple ways to get to the solution. There's multiple ways to If you're trying to get to 5, there's multiple ways to do that. 3 plus 2, 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1, there's 4 plus 1, there's multiple ways to get there. And so if we're leaning too heavily just on one, and then we're just crossing off golfers, like I'm come back to the name I'm thinking a lot of was Victor Hovland. And yeah, he had okay, made the cut. I think he was 30th. So I mean, he didn't do anything. But let's just say Victor finishes 15, finishes 10, finishes top 5 of everyone. And I'm really also thinking of then Brian Harman. I think the 2017 U.S. Open, when everyone said distance is key, distance is key. That's not Brian Harman, but you have to think, okay, if I'm not rostering a good around the green player, then Victor Hovland and Brian Harman in 2017 U.S. Open would have. And you can use example like this in every tournament, but then they can have. There's different ways to get the solution, different way to get into the top 10, and so if player A is not a good around the green player last week, I'm saying no. Well, then what's their ball striking like? When they're a great ball striker, well, yeah. So they can have maybe a ceiling type performance ball striking, and the around the green kind of it becomes less importance. But if I'm just thinking that 3 plus 2 is the only way to get to 5, that around the green performance is the only way to roster a golfer that I think is going to play well, then we get trapped. We get trapped. And the other way we get trapped is like we call it a delusional thought process, and it is a little bit of a delusion. What humans can do is, regardless if we've had success in DFS or not, we can have this contemptuous view that, like, I know the right way. Like how I make lineups, how I enter contests, how I play DFS week to week. We think of this is my strategy, this is what I do, this is what I know to be true, whether I've pieced it together from things I've heard, or this is just what I kind of believe. Regardless if we see results or not, we still lean on that, and that can kind of create a little bit of a delusion. And it's key not to, if that may be going on, and that happens in every aspect of life. For those that don't know, I work in mental health. I'm a licensed mental health therapist, and so that's just humans. That's just behavior, and it doesn't mean that there's a mental illness, or it doesn't mean that we're doing anything wrong. It's just that part of the mind that might have that delusional thought process correlates with the same part of the mind that wants us to make meaning. Like, okay, how am I, as it relates to DFS, creating meaning on what does a good strategy look like that creates success in DFS? And I should preface it that I'm not a DFS pro. I think it's 3 years now in a row I've made a profit, and I usually post that at the end of the year. In 2020, I think it was 40, and then last year was a little bit less than that. So it's not blowing anything away, but I'm no, you know, not stingy. I'll take 40 grand every year. And so, yeah, in DFS, it kind of fluctuates. But point being is that I allow the data, I allow to be kind of open minded to say, does my meaning making system on how I or how anybody would have success in DFS, is that backed by results? Because again, sometimes we can kind of get in this delusional thought process, one of which is that there's only one way to do it. And so, point being is that try to be open minded, because how we create meaning can also be very dangerous in losing money. But if you look at politics, religion, that, gosh, I know this is the right way and the other way is wrong. I know this to be true. And I love the quote that it says, it's not what we don't know that hurts us, it's what we know for certain that just ain't true. And so we have to understand that we are not going to know everything. And so, just like with politics, religion, and DFS, if we think that, hey, this is the best strategy to do it, this is what you have to believe, what you have to do, and we're not really seeing results, like that delusion can kind of blind us from maybe using kind of the rational brain. This might be going down a wormhole, but we have the emotional brain, we have the logical brain, and we have the rational brain in the middle. And the rational brain kind of leans on the other two, but it's easy to rely on the emotional brain too much within DFS, especially if we're kind of playing panicky or fear based because we've lost some money, or it can be too much on the logical brain, which is what I was just talking about at the very beginning. That hey, this is the only way to get to five. 3 plus 2 is the only way to get to five, when in reality, there's other ways. And so thinking it like that, being too much in the emotional logical gets us into trouble. So it's helpful just to be mindful and check in with like, all right, how am I thinking? How have I been going about my process? And that's why I tweeted that the other day. And again, probably not even related to everybody or even the majority, but just there seems to be, because of all the content, and there's so great content out there, but there's just a heavy push that maybe a side effect with all the content. It's leading people into focusing on too much of how the tournament will unfold versus how do we actually beat the competitors in our tournaments that we're in. And so, speaking of the industry, it's just something I'm fascinated about. I don't, I'm not. I don't know how much longer I'll do this. I got a kid. It's going to be born. My firstborn is going to be here, kind of the late summer. 2 months pretty much. You haven't practiced, starting another business, and but one thing I'll just, if I never, you never see me again, I wanted to understand is it's important that, who you listen to and also what you listen to. It's just like what you read, you are what you read kind of a thing. Is that behavioral change? So I'm relating it again back to psychotherapy. Behavioral change, one thing we know isn't really done by psychoeducation. So psychoeducation would be like, you know what, your dad never loved you, and that's why you have anxiety right now. That doesn't really help or change people. Now, education is key. Education on, and there's so many good content providers that offer great education. That's key. You'll need that starting out, or even just kind of reassessing your strategy. You'll need that. But if we're kind of feeding ourselves with the same education of, I listen to what the model says that we need for the course. You have to play off the tee. We're looking for around the green players. We're looking for guys like this, and we're looking for value for salaries. And you're just listening to podcasts that just give you that. Again, that type of education might not create behavioral change. We want the behavioral aspect to be, if we're looking at it through a lens of game theory, and that's just one maybe of many ways to have success in DFS. But if we're looking through it through a lens of game theory, is that behavioral, we're not even being aware of that. What we want to be aware is really focus on the process over that particular content of, oh, we really need ball striking this week, but really again the process of, how do I beat the competitors in my contest, and specifically GPPs. And that's, I don't hear many people talking about that at all. Now there's some great people out there, but it can really get paralysis by analysis as more people coming into the industry. And again, there's such great, and there's a really long list of people I could just name. And so um, I guess a good way to model it is like, when I'm done with this, I might pick a handful, five, people kind of I listen to, gauge the industry, and then I might leave it at that. Uh, but I mean, but listen and do what works for you. I mean, and again, I don't know that, you don't even have to listen to me. I'm not claiming to be the best or anything, but I do believe that there's carryovers to how just humanly our minds kind of work, and there's traps that we can get into easily, just like we've all, I'm not ashamed to admit, we've all had periods in our life where we felt like we were in a rut or not making the best decisions. Then we've had times in our life where we feel like we're flow and we're just cooking and we're moving along. And a lot of those we feel like we're kind of a slave to, or we're just along for the ride. But we have a lot of influence, and it is tough within the influence too. I mean, in the community as well. And I don't mean to chase a rabbit, but it's just, everyone wants to be the wittiest, smartest, and the funniest, and the most sarcastic. And I also don't want us to get away from what really drew me into starting this in the community, was just the support. And look, there's a ton of people that work harder than I do. I don't feel like I work, that hard, at least at the comedy. I just do my writing and do this, and it's fun with you all. But there's so many people that do great, and show them support, because it is a hard work, and the returns just from doing content aren't great. This is not a kind of a lucrative business. So if you have, I think like Joe and Andy, and I know there's Mayo and Tambo, and I like, a big Noto guy as well. Shoot them some love, because it is a grind doing this. Uh, and the best part about this, again, I don't know how long I'll be doing this, and I don't want to chase a rabbit too much, but the greatest part are are the people. Who was lucky enough to make a few friends, and that is great. So yeah, interact with people, share support, share love, and so I just I kind of wanted to remind people about that, and then just check in again with that strategy and kind of reassessing of kind of what we're doing. Just to recap, again, there's multiple ways to get to a golfer. There's multiple ways to how a tournament could unfold. And again, just sum it up real quick. If we feel like, and if we hear content wise that the best way or the only way to get to the solution of number five is 3+2, when there's multiple ways to do that. So just kind of keep that in mind. But what I'm going to do, we're going to go back, not go back, but I appreciate you. Yeah, David, you're a good one too. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to kind of look at the board here and just go through pretty quick. Again, it's a Monday. We don't have ownership, unfortunately, and kind of things like that. But yeah, just going to share my screen right here. And this is interesting. And so let's talk about kind of game theory. And I am just imagining more data helps us get a clear picture of what's people might be doing. And that data is ownership projections. We don't have that again. But I do kind of want to kind of go through the board and just maybe imagine what people might be doing. It's the week after a major, so everyone wants to talk about is, are people, or is a golfer going to be tired, exhausted? Who's going to be motivated for this? Is Mito going to be just dejected after his double on 18? Is Justin Thomas just going to be too exhausted? He even said it in his press conference, I think, how exhausted he is. So there's just a lot to think of. So I don't think Justin Thomas is going to be the highest owned guy in this above 9 to 10K range. People don't like to play the person that won the previous week, and this is like a roulette wheel that if 11 has hit 5 times in a row, 11 has the same odds of hitting the next spin as it did the previous spin. The odds don't, the math doesn't change, and so there's nothing in the rule book that says JT can't win again. And yeah, could he be exhausted? Could he be tired? It has lower chances. Yeah, maybe so, but again, we don't know, and that's the key thing. Remember, we do not know how the tournament is going to unfold, and if we're in that too much of that logical mind or emotional mind, we get away from the rational mind. And so there's nothing really data wise that tells us that, hey, Justin Thomas can't win. Again, that might be one of those delusional thought process that we get in, that we don't know is maybe harmful to us, that we start getting into this has to or it can't, like this has to be the right way or this can't be the right way, and that is really dangerous in kind of DFS. So pivot guys, so I'll chat. Yeah, what ownership do you pivot off of? That's a great question, and it really just depends on your own kind of how you handicap. So there might be a golfer that, let's just say, and I'm going to go to the board here at the top. Let's just say that if Willie Z is going to be interesting this week. Let's just say you love really Willie Z, but he's going to be 35% owned. You don't have to pivot off him. Trust your process. If you like Willie Z, then you roster him at high ownership to get some leverage. So maybe it's 70% of all your lineups have Willie Z. But if you find a guy that you're less confident, and so if I scroll down and I'm trying to just guess real quick who might be highly owned in this 7K range. I do want to talk about Rose, but like Kirk had a good week last week. Actually played very well. Let's just say that he's 20%, but we know that he's inconsistent. That says that there's more, I feel like, that can go wrong with a golfer like Chris Kirk in this situation. They can go right, and the opportunity of the leverage is too lucrative to pass up. And the leverage being that if he just happens to play bad, again, we cannot read the future. We don't know if he'll play bad or not, but just the opportunity for him to play bad. And if we fade him and pivot to a guy in the price range in around, let's say 10%, well, that leverage is lucrative. That helps us. And so you get an opportunity like that to gain that leverage. That's hard to pass up. But let's pretend that Chris Kirk checked a lot of boxes for me, and I'm like, you know what? I do like that play. Maybe I'll move to another high-end golfer. So I hope that answers your question. And it's a great question because, gosh, I really feel like that you can't get away from chalk. Chalk's going to be out there, and you're going to have to play it. But if you can make those accurate pivot plays, it makes the world of difference, especially in single entry. I like to get kind of more, and some of my lineups are kind of wild. When I do the 150 max, I make 150 lineups through the generator. But in single entry, I like to get kind of even more crazy because usually with the lower owned guys, they're less owned, and higher owned guys tend to be higher owned in single entry contests. But so JT models out, of course, really well. He's one of the best. But I'm really wondering what people are going to do with Scotty. I think played here once before. Actually, no, he's played here twice. I think he has one missed cut. He's only has 6 measured rounds, so that would be one made cut, one missed cut. Didn't look all too great yet last week. Probably highest owned guy. Yeah, it might be kind of trending down a little bit. Not that he's not going to have a good rest of the year, but just you're definitely not in the form. I do want to talk about Willie Z, and again, kind of we know what happened to it, and I'll point out that if we had him projected, I think around 10%. That may have been higher. I can't really remember, but I think he was only between 12 or 14% at the PGA last week. And that was a little recency bias. If he didn't miss cut at the AT&T Byron Nelson, he probably would be in the 20s. But one thing that Willie Z did do well last week was putt. He gained 4.6 strokes putting. We know that's not the norm for him, and so maybe we take that into consideration. But he did do his usual stuff. He gained 9.7 tee to green and 5.1 on approach. But I do like him this week. The person maybe I would wonder about the most is Victor Hovland. I liked him really at low ownership last week. Again, had an okay tournament, nothing great. I finished 41st, but he did play well. 4.5 tee to green, 2.7 on approach. He will not be highly owned. And so I really like that. Spieth, I might go back to Spieth again. And as we go down, I know I'm jumping all over just me tonight, so I'm naming just a few names, but this feels like a Tony Finau spot. Really encouraged with how Tony played last week at the PGA, and pulling up the stuff right here. 2.2 on approach. That's not going to be earth shattering, but he lost 7.7 on approach at the Wells Fargo. 5.6 tee to green. And that he's now gained strokes tee to green in 3 straight. I think 4 straight if we account the Masters. That's encouraging. He finished second in Mexico, 14.8 strokes tee to green. Yeah, so Tony's trending in the right direction. I really like it. Do not think he's going to be highly owned just because if people are looking at his recent results. It's just it's not really catching the eye. It's been kind of maybe a minor slump. Another one is Abraham Answer, who I'm trying to pull up what he's on. He's played here a lot. He's had 16 measured rounds at Colonial, and he ranks 7th off the tee, which makes sense. You got to keep it in the fairway. What I really like is he's 24th also in putting, 22nd in ball striking. And we look at Answer last week, which kind of came out of nowhere, and he was such a great DFS play. I was, in hindsight, just kicking myself. I didn't have him at all. He did putt well, almost 4 strokes putting, but he did kill it tee to green and on approach, almost 5 strokes on approach, 6.4 tee to green. So maybe this is where Answer kind of turns it on and has a good into the or a good second half of the year. Again, do not think will be too highly owned right there. Max Homa is kind of popular. Berger's picking up some speed. Berger is very interesting coming off the missed cut. I'm kind of surprised that I have heard his name so much today on Twitter. Again, Tambo's right. We live in a bubble, so it's probably not an accurate reading of what the people are going to do in our contest. But he's played well here. 14 measured rounds at Colonial, ranks 14th tee to green, ranks 23rd on approach, ranks 24th in DraftKings points. Taylor Gooch, probably not. This doesn't feel like a Taylor Gooch course. Have to keep it in the fairway. One of Taylor Gooch's, kind of biggest bugaboos is he can kind of leak it off the tee. Tommy Fleetwood, this is where his ownership is starting to fade. I really feel like, and he could be trending into a great. He's actually trending one of the best. So what I mean by trending, in just a few ball striking stats, it incorporates off the tee approach, ball striking, tee to green. The last 24 rounds, he ranked 17th, Last 12 rounds, he ranks 15th in the field, 8th, 7th, 6th, or last 4, excuse me, he ranks 6th. So he's, yeah, that's definitely a very, very nice trend. And so he could trend in very, very, very well. The problem with that is everybody is observing how well he's played and how well he played last week. He gained strokes in every key metric, finished 5th. I don't feel like this is as a Tommy course as last week was. Speaking of around the green, Tommy's great around the green. That's one of his big strengths. He can get really kind of creative. So it's really a question of, am I thinking that his ball striking trend will continue? Has he peaked or not? But also verse it of his ownership of how that's going to be inflated. I think at the Byron Nelson, gosh, I want to say I played him on, he's like 5%. What was he last week? 10 or 11, something around there. We're looking at maybe 15 to 16% now. So the ownership is definitely creeping up with Fleetwood. I shouldn't say definitely. That's just what I'm kind of imagining, and so I think it would. So I'm really going to have to consider is his maybe trend that he's doing with the strokes gain data, is that continue, but also is it worth buying more of the ownership? Because then we have a lot to think about in this lower or mid 8K range. You got Webb, who's playing well now. Mito, what do we do with him? Davis Riley, who was another good showing. And then even DeChambeau. So there's just a lot to consider. And again, right above them all is Tony Finau. Just a whole lot to kind of run through and kind of consider. Uh, but I mentioned Chris Kirk, and I didn't mean to say, or I hope I didn't say, I was just using it as an example. I don't think he's going to be 20%, but I like him. He almost reminds, like, he's a poor man's version of Tommy Fleetwood in this scenario that is not having the same trend as Tommy Fleetwood, not as good, but he's definitely kind of improving in a similar way. And maybe we get a ownership like that could be a good pivot play if Fleetwood is 17% owned and Kirk is 8, and I don't know if that's going to work out, but that could be it. Kirk finished 5th last week, 10.8 strokes tee to green. So he might be on a Monday night possible pivot play. We'll see with the ownership projections, but again, Kirk could go on to be pretty chalk. So yeah, we'll just have to see. That's one of those things we really love the data of what are other people doing in our contest, which is ownership projections. But kind of like Kirk so far. The interesting guy is what I wanted to talk about, and that's Justin Rose. And I'm surprised. Justin Rose has played here often, 16 measured rounds at Colonial. And damn, he lights up the board. He ranks 3rd in strokes gained total, ranks 8th tee to green, 7th ball striking, 6th short game, 11th off the tee, and 14th on approach. And the big one, he ranks 4th in putting at Colonial. Yeah, good for him. So he has the history, and he finally showed life at the PGA, and that is such a Justin Rose thing. Justin Rose has had terrible metrics outside of the Farmers. Just played terrible this year, and then just pops at the PGA, and he had some. I don't want to call it luck because I don't know. It's being, these golfers, you make your own luck, but chipped in, buried some long putts, just what Justin Rose tends to do. He did lose strokes off the tee. I'm a little worried because we're definitely going to need that this week. But he does have the course history, one of the best, maybe cumulative, maybe the best in the field, just with the strokes gain wise. So really interesting to see what Justin Rose does. It's a high risk, high reward play because we don't know if his performance at the PGA is an accurate showing of, is that we don't know if that's consistent or not yet. That one tournament is way too much small sample size, and earlier this year the sample size is much larger, and he's played terrible. But he does have the back class at Colonial, and so it's like, yeah, let's wait and see again on what ownership it is. If he comes in at under 10, he'll be in a lot of lineups. But this is if he's 20%, 25%, then it's like, all right, I see that there's risk there because his recent form, the sample size is way too small. That can lead to a lot of irregularities, and so maybe I'll kind of pivot this kind of somebody else. CT Pan is someone interesting. Kind of just, I know he's kind of, I always feel like somewhat chalk each week lately, but man, he's flying under the radar, having a great year, strokes gained wise and results wise. But let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in a row on approach he's gained. So he's got that dialed down, and it looks like 8 on approach tee to green. And again, if we want to say Harbor Town is a little comp course, got to keep it in the fairway. Scrambling's important because maybe the greens are a tad smaller. I don't know that, but that does sound a little bit of Harbor Town. He's kind of one here. I like CT Pan and Reed. Is Reed showing life again? Very pleased with his performance. Finally gained some strokes on approach. It was his first time. I'm really going to say first time all year gaining stroke, like meaningful strokes on approach. Before last week at the PGA, Reed gained .2 at the Tournament of Champions at Kapalua and 1.7 at the Players. That's it. Every other tournament this year, Reed's lost strokes on approach. But last week at the PGA, he gained 5.2, and he gained 5 strokes tee to green. He hasn't gained strokes tee to green since the 3M last year, Reed. That's signs of life. And if you want the course history, Reed's also played well here. 18 measured rounds at Colonial. Ranks 3rd around the green, ranks 15th putting, ranks 4th in DraftKings putts. I don't think Reed's going to be too highly owned. I don't, because he didn't have a great result at the PGA. Finished 34th. Probably due to his off the tee where he lost 2.7, but 5 tee to green. Kind of like Reed. Reed, that's something. Again, I'm reiterate, hasn't gained strokes tee to green since the 3M, gained 5 last week. Has the back class, probably going to be low owned, and it's definitely low price for Reed. 7,400 for a Masters winner. Ricky Fowler also interesting. Showed life last week. Not going to do there. I'm going to come down to the low 7K range. Stewart Cink. This has Stewart Cink vibes. When he won at Harbor Town last year, this has Stewart Cink's vibe. He came into Harbor Town hitting the ball really well, played really well at the Masters the week before. He went on to win Harbor Town. Stewart Cink, look at his strokes gained tee to green data the last 2 weeks. 6.2, 5.4. Off the tee, 5 strokes gained last week. 2 at the Wells Fargo, approach 2.1, 5.6. Again, I kind of believe Harbor Town might be a little comp course. Stewart Cink, winner there. And if you want to look at trends, let's look at it. Last 12 rounds in these ball striking stats, he ranked 17th in the field. Over the last 8 rounds, he ranks 4th. Last 4 rounds, he ranks 9th. At 7,100 for a golfer that's kind of trending in that direction. I know 9th is, not better than 4, but it's still in the top 10. That's hard to find. James Hahn is similar. He's kind of in a similar position, but I like Cink more. All right, Sicko range. Let's get down there. Lucas Glover, again, I know people have talked about his history. Kind of surprising well, has played well somewhat recently. But last week, 7.8 on approach for Lucas. Again, can't putt worth a damn, but 8.5 tee to green with, again, some of his history. Let's pull that up just to make sure. 20 measured rounds. So he plays this tournament often. Does rank 13th in the field in ball striking. I do feel like Lucas Glover, you're going to hear his name often, so I'm not going to mention it too much. JT Poston is a guy I want to mention. He'll probably be between 2 and 5% owned, I hope. RBC Heritage finished 3rd, went to Mexico, miscut, but then bounced back with a 9th at the Wells Fargo. He's now gained 4 strokes off the tee, in 4 straight events, he gained 4 strokes off the tee. Excuse me, that makes sense. Let's see. I don't think he's played Colonial, but I could be wrong. Let's see. Oh, he has. And kind of mixed results. Does rank 30th in the field off the tee at Colonial and 29th in putting. That's good. It looks like he's had miscut, but still 31st in DraftKings points at 6,600. JT Poston, kind of high on him this week. Barjan, I feel like everybody's been talking about him. So I'm going to come down to the very low, and that's just Trey Mullinax. Played well at the 18 Byron Nelson. Now I'm a little worried because we're very likely not going to see conditions like we did at the Byron Nelson than we did. I'm thinking of the Wells Fargo. So yeah, Byron Nelson. So yeah, maybe kind of somewhat. So there won't be as much as a Birdie Fest. They'll be much challenging this week, but at the Birdie Fest, gained 3.5 on approach, 5.3 tee to green. And not earth-shattering, but in this low 6K range, kind of worth a flyer. But the real guy in the 6K range I really like is JT Poston. I'd be remiss not to. I know he's not in 6K, but that's just Matt Jones. Matt Jones is the essential DFS GPP play, and I feel like if you do make 150 lineups in a course like this, Texas, and if there is going to be wind, you just got to play them. It's an oddity looking at his results in previous tournaments, how he goes from like miscut to third, miscut to second, miscut 14th win, and then miscut again. It's just so all over the place, and but it's a high, I wouldn't say high floor. He has a decent, I mean, ceiling, but a very, very low floor. So it's a risk reward play. But I like Mac Jones because one thing he really, really does well is, and maybe the best what he does is his off the tee game, strong off the tee, so he can get into fairway. What he doesn't do well is on approach and putting, not so much this year, but he is also a good around the green. And so yeah, I like Matt Jones in tournaments like this as a flyer. Liked him last week, didn't really work out, but um, I mean, we do. He's going to be low owned. He's only 7K. So that's just running through it on a Monday. I appreciate y'all. Just yeah, I just appreciate it. And if you want to check out, I'm just going to remind you at the very beginning is, make sure you're also, because it is important to think of, okay, how's this tournament going to unfold and what does a golfer need to do well here. All that is very valid, but also make sure to remember, okay, what do I need to do if I'm playing GPPs to try to beat my competitor, because that doesn't get the fanfare or the content as maybe the other side, and that's easy. And I get it. I would say it when we first started that, gosh, strokes gain data makes us sound a lot smarter than we are. I can and that's subjective, but gosh, I can really make a case for a guy, and I can say he played so well on approach, and here's the strokes gain data, and we really, really lean into that. But what is not really talked about much is, okay, well then how do we use that information to then consider it as, how do we beat the people in our contest? How do we beat the people we're actually competing against? So, David, I appreciate you. Appreciate y'all for listening. Hope this finds you well. Be kind, be gentle, have fun. We'll see you again next time. Good luck this week. Appreciate y'all. And shout out to Drew. Send Drew some good messages. He's not feeling well. So, Drew, we miss you. We'll be back next week.